So welcome, Wardah, to Mapping Innovation. It's great to meet you face to face, although we've been corresponding. Let's start with getting to know you a little better. Who is Wardah Inam? Where does she come from? What is her basic philosophy of life that absolutely drives her to do the things she does?
Thank you, Jehan Ara, for having me. A big fan of yours, and thank you for making Pakistani ecosystem, startup ecosystem, the way it is. So, it's a pleasure to be here. So, for me, I think the biggest thing has been since the beginning, since I can remember, is being able to do something for people, having an impact in people's lives, and that has been something that has driven me. What drove me into doing engineering, what drove me into my current startup, which is solving problems that people face and having an impact in their lives.
I'm really interested in your love for physics and math, which you've said that you had for a long time. So how did this love affair with maths and physics begin? And the reason I'm more interested in this is because how do you think we can convince other young women in Pakistan to pursue STEM and to pursue maths and physics as subjects? Because, the numbers are still extremely small.
Yeah, so I think for me, probably there are two things, right? I think one is to do with what you're good at. And probably I wasn't that good at the humanities subjects. So, Urdu, English, all the others. While it was very easy for me, math and physics and science in general, and it seemed very conceptual, and you didn't have to work too hard. You understood a concept and you were able to, do well. While in the others, you had to really work hard, to do well. So I think it probably was something because of the fact that I was good at it. But in general, I think from a very young age, I was always, I think the first time we got internet, the first site I went to was NASA Kids. And I remember it very, very clearly because, it was fascinating, the fact that you could, explore new worlds in a way that, as a kid. So I think, in general, curiosity and exploration is very fundamental to kids, and that's what science brings as well. And I think people just, if they're not good at something, they might, or not able to grasp it very, very quickly, they might think it's not for them. And I think that's where the education comes in, and this ability to whether it's not very natural to you, but there are ways to learn it. But letting people explore and be curious about things, I think that's where at least parents can play a role in letting their kids question and letting them explore. And I think that's very natural. I believe innovation and science is very natural to human beings, and it's something that most human beings are gravitated towards as well, from as human beings in general, whether it was discovery of fire or what makes humans is innovation, and a lot of it is technological innovation in general, which has set us apart from human species in general. So I think there's a natural instinct to do and explore, and I think that's where parents can play a role, and of course education system needs to evolve a little as well. And the good thing is now with internet, people can explore other avenues rather than just traditional education as well.
Okay, so Wardah, your early education and undergrad studies took place in Pakistan, and then you moved to the US for your master's and your PhD. How would you compare your learning environment and your experience in these different environments? What is it perhaps about Pakistan that there must be some positives from Pakistan and then some negatives, and something that you found was different in the US that we could perhaps adopt here?
So I think for me, my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved everywhere. So I have, I've been in cities, so I've been in Islamabad a lot, but I've also been in, we stayed in Mia Valley. So I've actually experienced probably the spectrum of education that you can experience. So did both A levels and being able to do like metric system as well. So I've been exposed to a lot of educational systems, and I think that's what shaped my interest as well. So I think in general the education system in Pakistan, there are some good things about it. I think we're very strong in math. In general, there is this idea of not being like calculus and the other being able to get into deeper mathematical concepts much younger, I would say. But I think there are some strengths that we have, as well as just the hard work and all the other things that our parents instill in us from a very young age, and which we need to do because it's a very competitive system. I feel when I came to MIT, grades were much more relaxed. It was much easier to get an A at MIT compared to it was GIK, because people are they're smart here, but there's the amount of hard work that somebody would put for a grade in Pakistan, I would say it's a little hard, is a little more. So I think it was much easier. I think the one thing that is really great here that I think people in Pakistan should do, and especially I think in GIK we should have had, was being able to tell students that they are smart and they can their ideas are worth something, and they're not they're not dumb if they're not working hard, etc. I think there is a philosophy where you have to be really harsh on the students for them to do well, and I think that is a difference where here there's a more of an attitude that you're really smart and you can do well, and all you have to do is put your work into it. But without even that, the way you're tested, etc., does test your intellectual abilities too.
So now let's talk about AI, which is your subject, right? So it's interesting that AI has become such a buzzword everywhere. A lot of people think of it as magic. Some claim that it's overhyped and has not delivered. Is it a field that is misunderstood? Can you dissect it for us a little bit and tell us which areas have been proven to be effective and where it hasn't worked and won't work, and for what reason? I mean, I think we need to understand this field of AI. It's just something that people have totally misunderstood it, at least in my opinion. What do you think?
So AI itself is a loaded word, right? We're calling artificial intelligence. And what is artificial intelligence? So the word we're using is pretty loaded, and it can mean a lot of things. And I think that's where the confusion arises as well. Because, first, is AI everywhere? It actually is, right? Like Google, whatever you do nowadays, whether it's Siri, Google, Netflix, it's all driven by, there's some AI. But what has really worked is, the field of deep learning and computer vision. So let's just take deep learning, and that has made AI what it is right now. So ImageNet happened in 2012. Basically, where deep learning algorithms were, when they were deployed on images, what we saw was that the results of those models was far superior than any other trained or programmed algorithms that we had written before. So I think that was a big change that happened, and what we realized, and why it was possible, because of compute becoming very cheap. You had now GPUs and being able to do so many transactions very, very costly, as well as within a certain period of time. And that really changed the ability to have these self-learning algorithms where you do not have to program everything. You don't have to write if statements everywhere. The algorithm itself can learn its parameters by giving examples. So that's what is called or termed as supervised learning. So particularly supervised learning in deep learning was the thing that changed or gave AI the pedestal that it's sitting on right now. However, there is this concept of the AGI or AGI, generalized intelligence, and I think we're still very far from that. What we're really good at is pattern recognition now. So that's what if you give a machine a lot of examples, it will learn and be able to reproduce. So I think that's what we've done well at in the past. And where does it apply to? Medical imaging is a big one because you're taking data. There's a lot of data available. You're learning from that data to provide insights, diagnosis, etc. As well as natural language processing has become really big because again we speak a lot. There's a lot of data created and being able to learn from that data as well. But areas where data might not be available or it's very it changes a lot. There's no patterns that you're trying to recognize. That's not where at least current AI technologies will succeed at. So I think understanding where the limitations of the technologies we have currently. Of course, there's a lot of work happening in supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and there's a lot to do there. But we're still not there where machines can just learn themselves and do any task. Right now, we're on very specialized. If you make a computer learn a very specialized task, it'll be able to do it.
Lots of people say that AI has let us down in this case where COVID, AI hasn't been able to predict it or help us see, where we'll be going with it, what we should expect. What's your opinion on that?
So I think I'm pretty bullish on what AI's role will be, especially with vaccines. As we start developing vaccines, drug discovery, AI and drug discovery is a huge topic, and it's a lot of dollars are going into it as well. A lot of work is being done, and I think when it comes to drug discovery, especially the vaccine, which will help us all in this situation, AI will play a big role. However, what has happened was unprecedented. So that means we don't have examples of these events that we can just learn from and what is the best course. And that is where the limitations of supervised learning comes in. And we just didn't have examples of and it's because of the unprecedented nature, the pattern wasn't recognizable, and I think that's where fundamentally have the limitations. But also, we've gone to a lot of basics as well, right? Where it's working, everybody's working from home. We are using Zoom right now. There are a lot of algorithms that are running in the background to make this conversation seamless as possible. And so AI is playing a role, I would say, in the background. But the good thing is it's good enough that we don't notice it. The technology, when it gets really good, you stop noticing it as well. So I think it's doing its job in those things.
Okay, now let's talk about your professional journey. So Overjet is not your first startup, is it? Can you describe the path that led you to now this startup, Overjet?
So for me, I've been actually, during my PhD, I was actually involved in a lot of startups. A lot of them might not be on my LinkedIn, etc. But, some are, going on. So I've raised money and have products in the market, etc. So I've been involved in startups, since, I would say, since I came to the US. And also I have tried different aspects of it, whether it's wearables, whether it's other energy technologies, and have done a few things. But I think for me personally, I wanted to work on something where again I could have a significant impact, and that for me is healthcare. And that's where Overjet comes in. But before this, I was also involved in microgrid technologies, so energy access and providing building systems that can again learn themselves, be able to optimize the power input, be able to provide power at the cheapest rate possible, and help build the systems and deploy them in some areas as well.
So tell me, I'm a little curious about where does the word Overjet come from? Why is the startup called Overjet? And who thought of it? and why? And has it worked in terms of branding the startup the way that you wanted it to?
So Overjet is basically the distance between your top teeth and the bottom teeth. So your top teeth have to be in front of your bottom teeth for your bite to close. And if the distance is too much, so your teeth are coming out, it's called buck teeth. If the distance is very less, your bite will not close properly, and you'll get jaw pains, etc. So there, in humans, it's about 2 to 3 millimeters that you need to have an overjet for to function properly. And for us to, a few reasons why we chose the name. One was the fact that it symbolizes this precise nature of dentistry, where where measurements are important, where it's not these small changes actually make a lot of difference in somebody's life. So it symbolizes that. But on the other side, it's because I think it has the name Jet in it, people think of the future. So I think for us that was why what attracted us to the name. It was, we just chose it, and we said let's go with it, and we'll see if we'll keep it. And I think especially because we got a lot of dentists recognize the term very, very quickly, and they've never heard it in a company as well. A lot of companies in the dental space have been called dental this, denty that. It's always or dent, and this was a term that they've not heard in the commercial sense. So I think they relate to it very quickly, and see it as a term that they understand that most other people might not.
So why dentistry, and how did you get into the startup and decide to do dentistry?
So for me, I made a conscious move of moving to healthcare. So after my PhD, I did a postdoctoral fellowship in biomedical sensing. So using wireless signals to detect heart rate, breathing, etc. at Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT. And that was my, actual conscious move of saying, the rest of my life, I want to focus on healthcare. And with that, I got recruited to work at a startup in biomedical imaging. It was started by a third-time founder, whose previous startups were worth billions of dollars. So, he had the capital, but then he recruited really good professors from MIT, who then recruited me to join that startup. And so worked on biomedical imaging, and basically then, went to the dentist. I had gone to a previous dentist, I just had changed my dentist, and the new dentist basically provided me a diagnosis, a very aggressive diagnosis, and 7 treatments needed, which I thought was very, very strange, because I had taken good care of my oral hygiene, as well as nothing was wrong before. So first it didn't hit me right then. So I actually said, okay, you know what you're doing, so let's start the treatment plan. And then one day I woke up and it just didn't seem right to me how that was possible. So I asked them for my x-rays. I started looking at how do you read dental x-rays, and realized that something my hunch was a little was in the right direction. And then I gave my x-rays to some dentists and asked them to diagnose. And what I found was not only everybody disagreed with that, the dentist, but there was disagreement between them as well. And that got me thinking about, having more standardized care. And once, when you have the ability to pay and you don't get the right care as well, there's something fundamentally wrong. And here I started looking at why was that the case, and that's how Overjet kind of started.
So from a personal problem that turned into a startup. So when you decided to start Overjet, what were the first steps you took? What was most important? So you identified a problem. You saw that many other people might face the same problem. Was it finding your co-founders? That was the first thing that you thought about? And tell us a little about that journey.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I actually did was I started talking to dentists. So any person I knew who was a dentist or who knew a dentist, I asked them to connect me with a dentist. And that's where I found one of my co-founders as well. He was actually at MIT before, so we had some common friends, and then he had gone to Harvard Dental School, graduated from there, one of my co-founders, I met him because of my going and meeting dentists and just asking them of what was the problem, was it a real problem? How big is this problem? And that's where I met the first co-founder, and the second co-founder basically was with me in my previous company, and he was head of computation there. So he had gone on to join Amazon. He was heading Amazon's one of the Alexa groups, and started talking to him as well to start forming the team.
Okay, so you have two co-founders, right?
Yeah.
And how big is the team? And what's the split between, say, engineers and people from other disciplines?
So we're 26 now, and I would say it's quite 20 or more engineers, and then we have 3 dentists and one or 2 business people. So it's engineering heavy right now. Especially, it will change in the future, but there's a lot of technology to be built here, and that's what we're building.
Okay, and are all your team members in the US, or have you outsourced some of the work, or are you getting some of the work done outside, maybe in Pakistan, for instance?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We most are here, but we actually have a small team in Pakistan as well. We are, so it's distributed. We don't have an office in Pakistan, but people from Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad are on the team, and they're doing a great job. The goal, wasn't to we have to have people from Pakistan, but you get really good talent in Pakistan, and so far they've done a great job. We also have some. They're considered as like we have some dentists in Egypt as well. They're considered as contractors. I won't add them in the in the employee count, but we have a 50 people team in Egypt as well.
Okay. So are you thinking of building this technology only for the US, or are you planning to take it to, say, developing markets and elsewhere? I know the focus has to remain first in the US and then get it done there, but eventually are you looking at taking it outside the US?
Absolutely. I think, for us, there is at least how it looks like right now is US for the near future, and then there's Canada, there's Europe, and the developing world. And I think there's a big potential of this kind of technologies actually helping the developing world to help improve the quality of care that is being provided. So the fact that anywhere in the world you can get at least the right diagnosis, I think that's the goal for us. The way dentistry is practiced in Pakistan is slightly different than the US, so that's why it will take us a little longer. But there is a lot of potential, especially when it comes to being able to scan or take images from your phone and being able to look at egregious issues in oral conditions and triaging patients. I think that would be one of the use cases in the developing world, and especially in Pakistan. And second would be on the higher end, which is cone beam CTs or 3D scans of oral cavity, which is basically something that is increasing over time in general. However, you need to have a special degree, which is you have to be an oral radiologist, and there's hardly any oral radiologists in Pakistan. So being able to read those scans is very important, and that's something that we will be focusing on in the future.
Terrific. Now let's get to the funding part, the meat of the entire thing, I think. So when did you get your first sort of round of funding or first bit of investment? When did that come in, and who was it that gave you the funding?
the first person who gave us funding was a dentist, and my mom and the dentist. So I would say they were the first one to give us a check.
It took 4 months, I think, 4 or 5 months for you to raise?
Yes, so we started raising mid-January, and we signed our term sheet in March and closed in April.
Okay, so that's pretty fast. So tell me, how do you go about being an engineer, and what do you need to do to transition from being an engineer to now being a CEO, learning how to raise funding, how to run a team of people? Now you say you have 20 people and this will possibly grow. Is there anything you need to do specifically to transition from the role of an engineer to now being CEO, fundraiser, team builder, and all of that? Are there things that people should try and learn? Does it come naturally?
I think for me, the biggest learning was getting away from, very factual presentations, and so for example, more about storytelling and making people understand the problem, etc., rather than how many numbers are. I think if you look at my first presentation I did, and then the last presentation, it's very objective, factual, towards more, do you believe kind of, and I think, which is strange as an engineer, because you think, okay, if I tell you, say it's $130 billion market, you should understand that, right? But what changed here was, okay, I can say that it's $130 billion, but if I tell you that the expenditure in the US for dental is higher than cancer expenditure, for you that will probably stick more, because people think of cancer as a huge market, while they might not think of dentistry as a huge market. But the fact that it's comparatively pretty huge, especially when it comes to something as cancer, which is perceived as a large market. So I think just the idea of making people understand, not with facts, but with stories or things that they might understand, and think that those are truths. I think that was at least a learning from my side, and the fact that I think another one is, you think if I give you 10 arguments, you're more likely to believe what I'm saying. But if I give you 10 arguments, probably 8 you'll believe, 2 you might not believe, and then those 2 will be something that you start arguing about or disagreeing with. So it's better to just give you 3 big ones that you actually can believe in as well, and we agree on these 3 things, rather than saying 10 or so. So I think just simplifying things, and not trying to put too many points there as well. So I think there's some just pitching changes that happen, and in terms of managing people, I think that's an ongoing learning in general. I think first is what kind of leader do you want to be, and first in a startup, you're first trying to just get stuff done, but realizing that you're trying to get stuff done with people, and these are people, and they have their feelings, and they might have their own troubles, etc., and understanding, having more empathy with people, and trying to rather than dictating, leading. I think that's something that I'm still working on. I think there's a lot to do there, but also I think now we have people in the company that I can learn from as well. One of my co-founders, again, he has 21 experience in now. Our chief dental officer has 35 years of experience. So a lot of people are very senior in the company who have learned a lot of the skills, etc., that I can learn from as well. So I think a lot to be done on that side, and trying to improve every day.
What is the next big milestone for Overjet and for Wardah Inam?
So I think for Overjet, I think it's FDA would be a big milestone for us. So we've been focused, our primary market right now has been dental insurance companies, and many reasons for it. Where its cost of customer acquisition is much lower, margins are much higher, etc. But also, we don't require FDA approval for it, and we can get into market very quickly. But the technology that we're trying to build, which is, as I mentioned, being able to support dentists and be able to provide a diagnosis when their dentist might not be present, that does require regulatory approvals, and that's what we're going towards, and I think that would be a huge milestone for us.
Okay, terrific. So tell me, has it been, I've been wondering this since I started chatting with you, has it been an advantage being on the East Coast as opposed to being on the West Coast? Or do you think your startup would have gone in a different direction had it been in Silicon Valley as opposed to being in Boston?
So I think there are advantages and disadvantages. I would say the advantage is it's still a little cheaper on the East Coast than the West Coast. It's the salaries are a little lower here. That means you don't you can go a little longer. Your burn can be a little lower. As well as I think that would be a big one. But for us especially, it's dentistry is huge on the East Coast. So just in Boston, we have three like really good dental colleges. So you have Harvard, you have Tufts, as well as BU in the small area. That means there are dentists everywhere. So that really helps us out, as well as then companies around it get so the whole ecosystem is much stronger here than the West Coast, and that's one of the reasons I would say for us to be why we are in the East Coast as well. When it comes to investments, absolutely West Coast is at a different level than the East Coast, and one thing I did for this round was actually fundraise in the West Coast. So our lead investor is from the West Coast, and try to make sure that we get investment from there. It helps us in the next round. So I think that it's a different game altogether on the West Coast with VCs lining. They're just like VCs all over the place, while in the East Coast it's a little different.
Okay, what is it like to be an international founder in the US? Is it easy, difficult? Are there things that you need to learn that maybe a person from the US would not have to?
So I think probably because we're, in Boston, I would say most founders I know are international in a way. Like if sometimes being US, you might be even at a minority. Definitely were if you were at MIT. So I think there's less of that. There's a lot of diversity, I would say, on the coasts, and a lot of there are investors with different backgrounds as well. So I wouldn't say it was too big of a difference. Of course, we get an advantage because we do study in English, and I think that helps us a lot when we come to, say, the US. English is not a very difficult language for us to communicate in, and I think that's a big advantage that we have, especially coming from Pakistan. But I wouldn't say it would be something that was on my mind through this.
And so you are an inspiration to many young people in Pakistan, and I'm sure even in the US, because of what you've been able to do in this short period of time. For you, who has been the biggest motivator through your journey?
I think for me, I wouldn't say it's like one person, but I actually listen to a lot of interviews. So I'm a big, I would say, probably at least one a day or something like that. I do listen to a lot of interviews, and I do try to learn from a lot of different people, and I which is the longer interviews you can learn a lot from. So I would say that would be where I've kind of learned a lot of things. Exploring different. It doesn't have to be just technology founders, etc. Having different people talk about leadership, talk about their founding journeys, what they think about like philosophy, etc. I think that's where I basically learn a lot from, and I would say I take inspiration from almost every day.
Okay, and if you had to give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
That's a good one. It'll be just to believe in yourself, and I think that would be it for me, especially because I think there is this idea of if you're trying to do something, there are a lot of naysayers, and which hasn't been done before. I mean, there are a lot of naysayers, etc. Being able to think logically about stuff of what might be the reason of why they're saying a certain thing, whether rather than taking it to heart. I think that would be a big thing for me.
Okay, key learnings that you've had both in Pakistan and in the US, anything that you'd like to share? Your journey has been not really long. I mean, it's 10 years since you did your undergrad, right?
Yes.
So any key learnings that you'd like to share about your growth, about how people younger than you can handle things here in Pakistan as well as in the US if they want to start a startup? What are the basic things that startup founders need to keep in mind? What should they focus on? Things that maybe they can learn from you so that they don't have to make the mistakes that they might otherwise make.
So I'll say I'll divide into two. One is, I think, especially when it comes to Pakistan, I think we need to have there's this belief that if you're smart, then you don't need to work hard. And I think it's a fundamentally wrong belief. If you want to do anything in your life, you need to work hard, and your intelligence can give you an edge, but that's not what will set you apart. And I think that's a cultural aspect that I think that needs to change. And I think that would be the biggest thing. If I look at people around me who are probably the smartest people out there, and probably are not doing what they could have done, I think that's the number one thing I notice. So there's nothing wrong with hard work in general. I think as a startup founder, I would say, I think people try to raise money before they have a problem to solve, and then they haven't figured it out. I think raising money is not an indication of anything. It just you need the money because you're trying to solve that problem. It doesn't say whether you're successful or not, or other aspects of it. I think taking time to think through the problem and thinking through the solutions, giving yourself as much time as you can, such that you come to a solution that you think will be viable, de-risking it for yourself, because you're the one who's going to spend the most amount of your time doing it. Money is, again, money is just money. Your time that you spend, the years that you spend on the startup will matter the most. So I think, the first time somebody thinks of an idea, they think of how do I get money for it. But I think it should be, if I can not raise money and get that idea or product to the customer, that should be a measure of success. And if money is needed in the process, how do you get that money should be secondary.
What about the product market fit? What about customer identification? All those things, how important are they?
I think, of course, customer identification is absolutely important. But how I would think about it is, in the end, you're trying to, solve somebody's problem, and you're trying to, whether it's a product or a service, you're trying to sell it to them. And if you can find people who are going to buy your product or service, you found your customer. So rather than, I'm not a big proponent, and I've done it a lot, in school, is, very academic exercises of matrices being made of, customer identification, etc. I think it's more important to just talk to people and try to sell them your product. You can tweak it as you go, but trying to figure out who is your customer, but basically by who is going to pay for it, for whom is the problem really big enough, so I think that's like number one. So less of a an academic exercise, but more of trying to sell your product. And I think the product market fit is something that comes a little later. I don't think you can tell, that early on whether, it's really going to scale the way you think it's going to scale, etc. And for some things, you need to work hard, and that's where the risk that a founder takes as well. Investors are lucky where they can just sit back and say, where are your numbers to let me invest? But to make those numbers, you have to work hard and change your things as needed, etc. But I think that's where believing in something that you really want to do and trying to make it happen. And if a product market fit doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But in general, you're trying to make sure that they're going to be more than that one customer that you sold to, and hopefully you can evolve with time and not burn your cash that you had.
There is people in Pakistan especially, and I guess everywhere, are afraid of failure. How important is it to, not be afraid of failure, to fail? It's not just the startup, but at every stage of your startup or every stage of an idea. Is it something that people really should fear?
So I think, if you're trying to do anything of value, you're going to fail ridiculously all the time. So why I say that is, I think at least what a PhD teaches you. So for me, I think the biggest lesson doing a PhD was it's literally failure after failure. You're trying to do something again that has never existed before. So you're not going to get it in the first try, and that means every day your experiment is going to fail. And that's why it's tough, right? That's why people say is PhD stuff. I think it's more of an emotional thing than anything else. Making sure that you move on to the next whatever the next experiment is. And I think it's sports can teach us a lot in that aspect as well. Say you try to hit a goal and you didn't get it. It doesn't mean you won't like start crying there. You're going to try again. So I think it's like moving to the next move in a way, and moving from learning why you weren't able to hit that goal, but not thinking too much about it as well. You're going to get a lot of tries till you want to quit, and if you're not quitting, then it's worth thinking of failure as a way to learn. And I think for me especially, the learnings I've had when if it's been like major failures has been much those lessons are really ingrained in me. So I think some failures is good for you in general, but I think if you're trying to do something bigger than or just new, you're going to fail probably 99% of the times, and then 1% of the time you actually succeed. That's what sets you apart. Even like fundraising, Jehan Ara, you definitely you've seen it, right? There's nobody I know who's actually gotten funding in the first go. It's just it's failure after failure and rejection after rejection. But that's where you start refining your pitch. You start figuring out whether this business really works as well, and then you get better at it.
What next for Wardah Inam after this problem has been solved, and where do you move to next? What do you want to do? What is the next big problem that?
So for me, I think I'm going to be, at least I mentioned before that I was consciously made a decision to get into healthcare. And I think that's where I want to spend the rest of my life as well, focused on healthcare. Of course, I might, I'm a curious person in nature, so other things, it's my curiosity. But for me, focusing on improving people's lives, and especially healthcare is a major portion of what determines your quality of life. So I think I see myself focused on healthcare for a long time.
Good. Thanks so much, Wardah, for talking with me, and good luck. We'll keep an eye on you to see how far you fly. We're all very excited in Pakistan, I think, hearing about what you're doing, what kind of problem you're solving, and the money is just one part of it. I think it's just exciting to see a young person who's decided that this is my philosophy, this is what I want to do, and then just go after it. So thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me in the program as well. Thank you.
Hopefully, once all this craziness is over, we might meet in person.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.